So without further ado, let's get started. So as kind of a starting point for today's topic, um, we can think about why we want to develop AI. And it seems like a kind of a general statement we can make about AI is that we want AI to do things on our behalf. That kind of seems to be the whole point of automating things. We want systems to kind of be able to do stuff that either we don't want to do, or we can't do, or takes a lot of time for us to do. Um, but then this kind of problem arises because lots of tasks that we would want to automate or outsource involve some aspect of morality in there. And we can think of these as kind of like big, uh, decisions where people's lives are at stake. So we can think about decisions involving kind of distributing medical resources. We can think about autonomous vehicles. But we can also think about kind of more everyday cases. Like we might think it's important um, whether chatbots can kind of make decisions about which information they should and shouldn't be sharing with the users. Um, so it seems like if we kind of just reflect on our everyday lives, lots of things we do are kind of morally laden. And this poses a problem if we want um, AI, or I'm just going to use the term kind of machines more broadly, to do things on our behalf. So I'm going to start with the question of whether we can teach machines ethics before later turning to the question of whether we should teach machines ethics. So there are kind of three broad approaches to teaching machines ethics, and I'm going to kind of go through each one and talk about some of the strengths, but also some of the challenges with each of these approaches. So one kind of class of approaches is known as top-down approaches. The reason it's called top-down is because these approaches aim to use moral theories as kind of rules for selecting ethical actions. So the idea is that we would kind of hard program in moral rules like from the top, and then the systems would then kind of implement those rules. So just kind of off the bat, it seems like there are a couple beneficial things about a top-down methodology. One is that we might think that the whatever ethical decisions machines are going to make that are programmed in this top-down way, they'll probably be pretty predictable, given that we're kind of hard coding in a set of ethical rules for the machines to follow. Similarly, we might also think that these machine decisions are going to be much more scrutable than other methods. So it seems like when a machine makes a particular decision, if it was programmed in a top-down way, it'll be somewhat straightforward for us to figure out why it is that it made that decision. So for instance, if we kind of hard programmed a rule that said don't lie into the machine, we might think that it's relatively easy to predict that in an instance where a machine is faced with the question of whether to lie, that it'll tell the truth. And that if we kind of want to backtrack and figure out why it made its decision in that particular situation, we might be able to then like trace it back to that rule that we implemented into the machine. So one kind of question is, well, which moral theory would we implement into the machine? I'm going to go through a couple of candidates and talk through some strengths and issues with each of those. So one model might be some sort of commandments-based model. In this type of model, we'd be giving a system just kind of a set of moral rules to follow. So we might think of the 10 Commandments being kind of implemented into a machine. For those fans of science fiction, you might be familiar with Isaac Asimov's 3 laws of robotics. We might try to implement those into a machine, or we might just kind of come up with a set of rules and try to program those into the machine in this kind of top-down way. And the benefit of that is that it seems like these commandment type systems give us specific rules that are kind of practically implementable in a wide range of situations. So, you know, it's pretty, you know, don't lie, don't steal, don't cheat are pretty straightforward moral rules. It seems like those are kind of relatively practical to apply. Then there are a couple of challenges with the commandments model. And one of the main challenges is that this set of rules we're gonna give the system, there will be situations in which those rules conflict. And unless we kind of have some higher order rule or some higher order principle to appeal to, it's not really clear what the system would do if the rules conflict. Another kind of challenge with this type of system is that it's not going to be comprehensive. So we might have kind of a set of moral rules, like a set of commandments, but it's not clear that those would cover kind of every possible situation that the machine could find itself in. So the other two top-down approaches that have been proposed or widely discussed draw from what are kind of the top two competing theories in moral philosophy. So the first is utilitarianism. There's loads of different types of utilitarianisms and different ways to kind of cash out what utilitarianism is. But we can just kind of broadly say that utilitarianism is a principle that tells us to maximize the good and minimize the harm. Um, so one kind of good thing about trying to implement utilitarianism top down is that it kind of straightforwardly commits to a quantifiable method. So it straightforwardly uh, kind of tells the system that we're concerned with this kind of one variable utility or this kind of harm benefit type of analysis or good harm type of analysis. And we might think that that's kind of at least lends a straightforward way to being implemented into a machine. But that method is going to come with challenges as well. One challenge is that there's some skepticism about whether decisions in the world can really be represented in this way on kind of in terms of one variable that's like harm or utility or something like that. It might just be that it's really difficult, if not impossible, to trade off certain values in certain situations. And so we might worry whether it's even kind of implementable to have a utilitarian system. Another issue with utilitarianism is it's unclear how a system might do the relevant computation. Because, for instance, if we're thinking about what we should do in a particular situation and we're comparing two choices that we have to make, each of those choices can have lots of consequences. Those consequences can go very long term, they can have ripple effects. And so it's not really clear how we could design a system that could really kind of account for every possible consequence of every action that it might take. The other alternative to utilitarianism would be a deontological approach. So Kant is kind of famous for his deontological approach, which basically says we should appeal to some kind of higher order principle. So in Kant's case, he's got what's called the categorical imperative, which says that any particular action that you want to take, you should ask whether you can will that action to be universalized. So if I'm thinking about whether to lie in a situation, I should ask myself whether it's possible to will that everybody kind of adopts the maxim or the course of action to lie. And it turns out that there might be some sort of impossibility associated with that. And so I should conclude that in this situation, I shouldn't lie. So the good thing about this is that, or the good thing about a top-down deontological approach is that it kind of gets us around that problem of conflicting duties that we had in the commandments model. So the idea with the Kantian approach in particular is that it's going to give you a method for determining the right action in any case. It kind of goes beyond just like a rule that might conflict with another rule. It's kind of a more general method for figuring out what the right thing to do is. But there are a couple of challenges with this approach as well. One is that it's quite abstract. So, humans debate a lot about what it means to universalize a maxim in this terminology that I just gave. You might find it confusing. You're not the only one. I also find it confusing at times. And so it's not really clear kind of how we could implement this into a machine, given that this kind of principle is hard to flesh out. We might also worry about the computation in this approach because, for instance, we might be concerned with what people's intentions are. That might tell us about whether a particular action is right or wrong. And so we would need the machine to be able to kind of have an understanding of human psychology and what people's intentions are. And it's not really clear how we can get that from a machine. So kind of one theme with these top-down approaches that you might have noticed is that computationally they seem very difficult to implement. There's lots of information that needs to be computed and considered in terms of at the ground level, figuring out what the relevant criteria are for figuring out what the relevant information is for any particular decision, figuring out the effects and how to compute that in the long term, figuring out maybe what people's intentions are. Plus the information overload associated with how to actually weigh those factors against each other and how to maybe make those factors make sense with appeal to kind of a broader principle. The other kind of key question or key challenge with the top-down approach is I've just given you kind of an overview of some different methodologies or different kind of moral principles that we might appeal to when we're thinking about top-down implementing ethics into machines. But then, of course, there's this question: which moral theory should we use? And it seems like there's maybe a straightforward answer, like, of course, we should just use whatever the right moral theory is. But the problem is that we don't know what the right moral theory is, and there's lots of reasonable disagreement about what the right moral theory is. So while it seems like it would be nice if we could kind of program ethics into machines in this kind of top-down rule-based way, it's not really clear how we would go about doing that. So, as an alternative to the top-down approach, we might think, okay, well, let's try a bottom-up approach. So instead of kind of trying to give machines rules that they then implement themselves, we might be able to just kind of create environments in which ethical behavior is either selected for or rewarded. So we might think this is somewhat similar to how we raise kids. That there's a lot of kind of learning from experience, a lot of action, and then being told whether something was right or wrong, and then kind of adjusting your behavior in light of that. So a couple of methods. One is kind of just broadly machine learning. There's lots of specific machine learning methods, lots of kind of combinations of methods. So you might have a system that engages in reinforcement learning, for instance, to learn to try to learn to do the right action. But there might be other forms of kind of supervised and unsupervised learning. I won't go into the details about kind of these methods in particular, but if you know kind of different machine learning methods, most of them will probably be applicable to, or at least like in principle, we might think how given kind of data about ethical behavior, these methods might kind of create a system that's at least trying to do the right thing. Another kind of maybe less popular method is to try to kind of simulate childhood development or evolution. But a lot of those methods are a little bit more speculative at the moment. It seems like machine learning is kind of the kind of main approach that people are taking in the bottom up method. So a couple benefits of the bottom up method. The first is that we solved that problem we ended on with the top down approaches of figuring out what the right moral theory is. We actually don't need a correct moral theory for a bottom up method. All we need is lots of data that a system can learn from. So data about like what the right thing to do is in a particular situation. So it could be kind of explicitly moral data, or it could just be data about how people act in the real world. And maybe a system just kind of like learns to replicate human behavior based on that. So there's no need to kind of impose what the kind of right morality is. We might think that this gets us towards this kind of bottom up method might get us to a more kind of common sense view of morality. So this method also offers us more flexibility because there's not as much kind of rigidity in terms of the rules of ethics. But of course, there are a couple of challenges. Because we don't have these rules coming in from the top, we might think that there's kind of like a lack of safeguarding or a lack of restraint for what these systems might do. And relatedly, we might worry that the systems are going to learn the wrong thing. So imagine a system that's trained on lots of data about how you drive. Is it going to learn to do the right thing? Maybe for the most part, but also maybe not. I mean, humans, we break the law sometimes when we drive. We speed. We sometimes cut people off. Sometimes run red lights. We sometimes do dangerous things. And so there's no guarantee in the bottom up method that a system is going to learn what the right thing to do is. It's just going to learn to replicate whatever is in its data. And we might also wonder about kind of what type of feedback we can give to these systems. In the case of children, yes, there's a bit of reward and punishment in there when we teach them about morality, but there's also a bit of kind of explanation and developing an understanding of justifications and reasons. And it's not exactly clear how we would implement this into a system. And so on the bottom up method, we might really worry that systems are going to kind of make mistakes, especially when they're put in new situations that maybe weren't covered by the training data they were given. So you might be thinking, okay, we've got some problems with the top down, but there's some promise there. We've got some problems with the bottom up, but there's also some issues there. Maybe we can just kind of combine elements from the two. And this is what hybrid or kind of mixed methods aim to do. So they aim to kind of combine top-down and bottom-up approaches to create kind of a more dynamic way of integrating ethics into machines. Um, so this might give us the best of both worlds. From the top down, we get kind of restraints, so we get rules that maybe a system can't violate, and we maybe get some more general guidance, like we should be kind of uh, the system might kind of generally aim to maximize the good, or it might generally aim to follow kind of a set of rules, or it might generally aim to act on universalizable maxims. But from the bottom up, we might get some other nice things. We might get implicit values. So these are things that we're not kind of values we just kind of learn through navigating the world, rather than kind of being told in a rule-based format. And we might also get a bit more of the flexibility that a bottom-up approach offers. So maybe the hybrid approach can kind of get us all these things we might want. But the flip side is that it might also get us some things we don't want. So it might just be that there are some problems that come with combining these theories and mechanisms. Some of them might be technical problems, but some of them might also just be problems of what to do when, for instance, our theories conflict with our implicit values. So what happens when the stuff we try to program in from the top comes into conflict with stuff that we got the system to learn from the bottom? So in humans, one way that philosophy is often described is as consisting of what's called reflective equilibrium. So the idea is that we've got some principles that we think are true, and we've also got some intuitions, and these things are kind of constantly in balance with each other. So sometimes we have our principles and our intuitions conflict with those, and sometimes we have to revise our principles as a result. And sometimes we have to revise or reject our intuitions based on our principles. And humans have this kind of ability to engage in this reflective equilibrium to kind of balance out these like top-down rules and principles we have with these bottom-up kind of intuitions that we've learned from our experiences. But it's not really clear how we could have a machine that kind of has that reflective capacity to really go back and forth between the top-down principles and the bottom-up implicit values. So that leaves us with this question of kind of what would happen in cases of conflict. There are also just some kind of outstanding questions about whether we can teach machines ethics. You might think that in order to really do ethics, you might need certain things like emotions or consciousness, maybe understanding, maybe embodiment. And it might be that if we can't kind of have machines that have these capacities, that they just can't do ethics to begin with. There's also a question of how we might test whether a machine really has ethics, whether it really knows right from wrong once we've tried to kind of implement either these top-down, bottom-up, or hybrid approaches. And then there's also this kind of overarching question that'll come up later about whether we can really get a system that can kind of act from morality as opposed to just in accordance with morality. So we might think about this distinction in terms of, like, suppose you train a dog not to bite people. It might be acting in accordance with morality. So it might be it might be kind of aligned with the principle of not harming people who don't deserve it. But it's not really acting for moral reasons. It's not refraining from biting somebody because that's the right thing to do. It's just doing it because it was kind of rewarded and punished in a way to kind of get it to engage in the right behavior. And so we might wonder whether it matters, whether a machine can really kind of act for moral reasons versus just be kind of guided and trained in a way where it just makes the right decision. So this is kind of a question of whether what matters is that the right decision is being made, or whether it matters like why the decision is being made and who's making it. So this brings us to part 2. So we've got all of these considerations about whether we can teach machines ethics. I've gone through a couple of different approaches and pointed to some challenges with each of those. But now we kind of have this second question of, even if we can teach machines ethics, should we? And I'm going to spend the rest of the time I'm going through some considerations on both sides of this question. So I'll start with reasons against teaching machines ethics. So one might just be that we shouldn't because we can't. Um, you might think of all the considerations I've just gone through about the challenges in building machines that can really do ethics. You might think that these problems are just like intractable, either like at the theoretical level or at the technical level. You might think there's too much disagreement about what the right thing to do is. That we can't really, it's impossible for us to make a system that can do ethics, and so we just shouldn't, because it's never going to be kind of right. um, Another reason kind of against doing machine ethics is we might think that safety is what really matters, rather than just ethics. So you might think that as long as we can create systems or machines that don't harm people, that's all we really need to worry about. You might think that the law can cover a lot of what machines should and shouldn't do, and that beyond that, maybe just individual preferences will get us there. So you might think in the case of autonomous vehicles that the law will dictate the rules of the road, and then anything that's kind of up to the discretion of what would normally be a human driver can just be kind of programmed into any individual car based on the individual's preference. And so the idea is that the machine will never have to make any moral decision itself. It's all going to be kind of sorted, by just what the user wants plus what's restricted by the law. Similarly, for language models, you might think that like laws are going to dictate which information can and cannot be disclosed, and then you might have kind of users or companies providing the rest in terms of whatever their preferences are, such that the model itself never has to make an ethical decision. Humans are always going to be making the decisions. Um, Another reason against machine ethics is you might worry about this problem of moral de-skilling. So I think last week you talked a little bit about de-skilling in the workforce, to the idea that like if AI systems take our jobs, we might be worse at doing particular things. So kind of like how everyone's really bad at reading maps now because of Google Maps. Um, we might worry that something like that will happen with morality. So if we're trying to kind of develop machines that can just make ethical decisions for us, our skills might atrophy because we're making less of them ourselves. We might think this is bad instrumentally. So we might think this is bad because there might come a point where we have to make a moral decision ourselves, and we've gotten really bad at it because we just have outsourced all those decisions to machines, and that might make us worse at moral decision making. But we might also have intrinsic concerns. So we might just think that engaging in moral decision making is something that's really important for us to do as humans. Maybe it's part of human flourishing. And so we shouldn't be trying to kind of outsource these types of decisions to machines. We should kind of keep those within ourselves. There might also be domain specific concerns against building moral machines or machines that can do ethics. For instance, in the care bot industry, care bots tend to work with vulnerable populations. So we might worry that we're kind of further isolating, for instance, elderly people in nursing homes if we think that we can just program care bots to do the right thing and then kind of outsource all the care to those systems. We might be kind of risking something in that domain. We might also worry about kind of the military domain. We might think we shouldn't be teaching at least military systems ethics because we shouldn't be using autonomous weapons in wars at all or something like that. So we might worry that like in particular areas, it would be a bad thing to try to develop machines that can do ethics, because there's kind of, it's not really the place for them. We might also worry about responsibility. It might be that, you know, if we develop machines that do ethics, people might misdirect their blame at the machine when something goes wrong, when maybe there's a human somewhere that's responsible. We might also worry that actually there might be some sort of gap in responsibility. So it might not really be straightforward who's responsible when things go wrong. So if we have a system that can make ethical decisions, but it does make a wrong decision, we might worry about kind of who to blame, because maybe the programmers couldn't really foresee what went wrong. And if we really do think that it's just the machine itself that's wrong, we kind of have to give up punishment, and maybe that's important for our systems of justice. So we might worry about kind of what happens to the responsibility domain if we're kind of building machines that we then allow to make moral decisions for us. But there are a couple of reasons to bear in mind that it might be good to try to develop machines that can do ethics, even with kind of the backdrop of all of these challenges and all of these risks. Um, One reason that's kind of discussed a lot is maybe a bit more of a pragmatic reason, but the idea is that it's kind of inevitable. And what do I mean by it's inevitable? I basically mean that market forces are going to demand that we use machines in a wide range of contexts. So this is kind of the pragmatic side. People are going to want machines that can do a lot of things for them. And so it's inevitable that they're going to be operating in contexts that are morally salient, where there's going to need to be moral decisions made. And so the idea is that, it would be kind of dangerous of us not to try to implement ethics into machines, because they'll be in these contexts anyway. So it's kind of a pragmatic reason, or kind of a practical reason for wanting to develop machines that can do ethics. Um, Another reason in favor of machine ethics is that we might think that kind of focusing on safety isn't enough to get us there. So focusing on systems that kind of can't harm us might not be enough. Um, there might be situations in which we can be harmed through inaction. So maybe we can be harmed by a system or a machine kind of not doing anything when it should be doing something. Um, and maybe kind of just focusing on harm reduction won't quite get us there. We might also think that there are moral values that are important aside from harm, and it would be hard to kind of figure out how to implement those without kind of teaching machines ethics. So we might really care not just about harm, but about privacy and autonomy, and other values that maybe we think a pure safety framework kind of can't get us to. Um, Another reason in favor of machine ethics is that machines are going to be really complex. People already talk about AI systems as black boxes. So there's the sense that it's really hard to know exactly why they're doing what they're doing. Um, and it might be that because we might not be able to know exactly what machines are doing, they'll need kind of some moral competence. Otherwise, we just have these decisions that are kind of completely unexplained, that we have no reason to think had ethics anywhere in there. So the idea is like at least if we kind of keep ethics in the mix, we can have kind of some sense that these black box machines are kind of at least programmed in the direction of making kind of morally good decisions. And it seems like it's not always going to work to just kind of like contain these systems within a controlled environment. If we really want systems that are going to kind of do a lot of things on our behalf, they're going to be very complex, and they're going to not just be able to kind of, you can't just have a driverless car that just operates within like a controlled environment. There's always going to be external factors at play. And so we might think that there will always be kind of moral decisions to be made. We might also think that machine ethics will enable trust both in the machines themselves and the companies that are developing them. So the idea here is that if you kind of teach a machine ethics, we might be more inclined to kind of feel good about relying on that machine because we know that it's kind of being programmed with an ethical compass. And maybe we'll have kind of more faith in companies as well if we know that they're developing systems in this way. Lastly, we might think that it's good practice to teach machines ethics to kind of reduce the number of bad actors that can kind of use these systems. And sometimes bad actors kind of act intentionally, and sometimes there's just unintentional bad use. So you might think, for instance, it's a really good thing that if ChatGPT can decide whether or not to disclose certain information to certain users, because it will stop those users from using that information for bad. So like you wouldn't want ChatGPT to be giving users instructions for developing weapons, for instance. We might think that if we have a system that can really kind of evaluate the situation and evaluate what the right thing to do is, then maybe we can kind of stop some bad use of AI systems. Oh, I was wrong. There's one more. the last is that we might think that kind of this project of machine ethics might actually make machines that are better than us at morality. So you might think that human morality is kind of impeded by a lot of things like selfishness. And maybe it would be a good thing if we can kind of develop machines that can do ethics because they'll be kind of better than us, morally speaking. Um, and maybe this whole project will kind of help us understand morality better in trying to kind of figure out um, exactly which moral rules are kind of important and how humans learn morality, how you could program morality. Maybe this will all help us kind of learn more about our own moral system. Just a couple of very quick kind of closing thoughts about what the next steps might be. Um, one one kind of in light of all of this information, we might still think that there's value in trying to build moral machines. So maybe we should kind of try to develop new methods, or maybe we should focus on trying to develop machines with moral capacities. So like moral sensitivity or something like that. So still kind of not giving up on the machine ethics project. Um, Another option, which it seems like a lot of companies have taken, is to focus on alignment. So instead of trying to kind of directly program ethics into machines, we might think that there are kind of other methods that can get systems to behave kind of in line or in accordance with what we want with our values. So maybe there are ways to do that without needing to kind of directly teach machines ethics. I'm happy to talk more about that in a couple minutes. Um, and then the last next step we might have is to maybe limit machine use. So it might be the case that in specific domains where it seems like we might need machines that do ethics, we should actually just limit our use of machines in those cases. So you might think that autonomous weapons are one of those domains. But it also might be that for particular kinds of decisions, or for we should kind of have a think about what are the kind of the ethical or morally laden decisions that are to be made, and do we really want machines making those? Can we really develop machines that can make those, or are there certain decisions that should kind of be left to humans to make? Here are some readings that might be relevant if you're interested in these topics, and thanks very much.